My name's Daniela. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. Today, I'm breaking my silence.
We're friends, right?
We are.
We're more than my mentor, but I see how successful your life looks and people look up to you. Has it always been like that?
No, and success is subjective. If I look at where I am now compared to where I was 3 years ago, or even where I was 12 years ago, my life looks eons different. It looks worlds away. And if I look at where I grew up and how I grew up and where I am now, they're like two different lives. We're like two completely different human beings. So yeah, it wasn't always like that. So where I grew up on the council estates of Preston, where things like domestic abuse, addiction, poverty were just inherent. It wasn't anything unusual for us, certainly for my family. All those things were, dare I say it, normal. So I didn't know when I was little that anything was different, that anything was unusual. When in actual fact, sort of the older I got, the more I realised that it was inherent and it was generational. So what I would bear witness to as a child was my mum and dad, my dad being the perpetrator, lots of coercive control, lots of emotional abuse, eventually violence. But it wasn't just them, it was both sets of grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, friends. So toxic intimate partner relationship and skewed intimate partner relationships were just an inherent part of the information that I received as a kid. So when you don't know that that's abnormal or different or not right, it informs some of the decisions that you make with regards to your own intimate partner relationships. Is exactly what happened with me. That I found that as a child, this is really weird to articulate because I don't normally talk about my story inherently. I normally just allude to it. I was a performer from a really young age, but what I found now, like on reflection, is that me being a performer was a way to keep me and my sister and my cousins safe. So if I was singing or if everyone was laughing, then nobody was fighting. And that was, an inherent skill of mine, but a survival tactic. And it was only when I was reading like Will Smith's autobiography and he was talking about his experience of his mum and dad's abusive relationship. And it was a real light bulb moment for me that the skills and talents that I have now, that I've forged into a successful career, were actually my survival mechanisms as a child. It's really strange to kind of reflect on it that way, that I've been able to take these mechanisms that I used from being a kid to now inform the work that I do, but also to do good in the world. I think that's crazy.
You mentioned that you don't often talk about this part in a deeper way. Why?
I think for me, because I tell my story sort of on a surface level, I worry about trauma porn. And I know when me and you have talked about how the media covers domestic abuse stories, that often it is like a trauma dump, and I never wanted to put upon anybody. And also, I think that there are degrees of how people experience abuse, and it's subjective. What I experienced, somebody else could look at my experience and think, well, actually, that's not valid. You've not almost been killed in your particular situation. You've not experienced X, Y, and Z in your particular situation. It's taken me a long while to realise that my experience is entirely valid, that it was valid, it was dangerous, it was real. So yeah, I think that it's interesting that our relationship dynamic has brought me here today to share in this way where I feel validated and I feel that my experience, even though my work is within the domestic abuse sector, within my CIC myself, it always feels like there are always people worse off. So it's always sort of had me standing behind my story a little bit and just alluding to it. I've experienced domestic abuse. You don't need to know the ins and outs of it. You don't need me to dump on you. Like, you've already got your experiences and they're bad enough. You don't need mine adding to it. So I think it's maybe even a worthiness, I guess.
How does it feel doing this then?
Really weird. Really weird.
It's intimate, right?
Yeah, it is. And hearing other people's stories and, being part of your community and, being a member on your platform and obviously working really closely with you, sitting here feels more cathartic, I guess, than any situation that I've been in, be it therapy or CBT or whatever it is that I've, you know, tried to engage in as part of my healing, because healing's been an ongoing thing. I've been aware that these things have happened to me. I wouldn't be doing the work that I do in the world had I not been aware of it. But it's really strange to be in this position, actually saying to the world that these are the things that have happened and this is the outcome and this is the reason why I do what I do.
And is there anything about living with a perpetrator as a child and then an adult that maybe has shaped your storytelling? Now, you said you've not really been able to go deep and share your experiences.
I think it's because my experiences are intrinsically linked to other people's experiences. If I look at my sister, mine and my sister's experiences are intrinsically linked. So my story is her story. So when I speak about my experiences, I'm speaking about her experiences. And sometimes, like, even though I know that she's absolutely okay with me sharing in this way, it still feels like some of it's not mine to share. The same with my cousins, the same with my aunties, the same with my mum. I did a radio interview a couple of years ago, and I actually said, you know, how we grew up, we experienced poverty. And my mum got on the phone to me and she cried and she was like, Daniela, do you think we grew up in poverty? I was like, Mum, we had our house repossessed. We couldn't afford anything. Like, the ice cream van came along and the music was playing, and the music was playing because they'd run out of ice creams, you know. It was, did we grow up in poverty? Yes. Were we well looked after? Were we cared for? Of course. Like, you had us and we were clean and we were fed and we were all these things, but were things difficult from a finance perspective? Yeah, absolutely. And it felt like I was telling her story, and she hadn't come to grips with the idea that, you know, we were poor, that she was experiencing abuse. It wasn't just addiction. It wasn't just my dad was an alcoholic. She was experiencing abuse. He was a perpetrator. If we looked at it, my grandma experienced abuse at the hands of my granddad, and the same with my paternal grandparents. And I think that in me telling my story, for that to be made public, sharing the intrinsics of the story, I mean, instead of just alluding to it, it means that I'm almost opening the lid on a mess of abuse that happened inherently throughout my family. And I think sometimes I feel like I carry that a little bit because of the work that I do and the space that I take up.
That sounds like a heavy burden you're carrying, protecting all of those people. But what about you?
It's interesting because if I think about it like that, that's played out in the work that I do within I Am the Queen Bee today. It's played out in the way that I overshare. I overshared on the internet, or overshared in terms of, when I say overshare, I mean kind of live streaming as things are unfolding for me, telling people about my plans and hoping to be inspiring, but it's in hope that people can see that they can get themselves out of situations. But what I've ended up doing is carrying responsibility for not just my family, but for my community, for the people that I work with, for the people that are on my team. So much so that if I think about even the last 3 years as my business has taken off, feeling that burden of responsibility as being that pivotal person in the middle of everything, that if I drop the plates, the whole thing falls down. That it's really, only just saying this out loud now it makes me think, well, that's kind of how I felt then. That if I fell to pieces, if I didn't perform in that particular space within the family, or if I take myself out of it, I don't have to be responsible for it. So I had like two things: either I was running away from it so I didn't have to do that, or if I was in the middle of it, I felt the burden of having to carry everyone. And that's really interesting to see that that's the way that the dynamics of my team work now, and how these cycles sort of play themselves out in different ways. Yes, it is a burden, but it's also a way of giving back. And some of the work that I've been doing right now, like even in the last few weeks, calling time on a relationship that I've been in for nearly 13 years, sort of on and off between friendship and marriage and everything in between, is me starting to set boundaries for myself, is me standing in front of the oncoming train of cycles of behaviour, be that settling or chaos. And it tends to be one or two one of those two things. I either settle so it's safe and secure and steady away, or it's really chaotic, which is where I found myself in my previous intimate partner relationships, where I was experiencing abuse. Where I've kind of got to this age now and working with the people that I'm working with and, you know, working with you in this sort of mentorship way, in this friendship way, seeing that I can set these boundaries for myself has meant that, you know, I've started to call time on what I'm not willing to negotiate on anymore. So even now, you know, people will look at the work that I do and say, oh, you know, she's successful, and, you know, I've created the Fly Anyway Foundation, where we help people who've experienced domestic abuse build businesses, because I built a business and business saved my life. But actually, I'm still a work in progress. I'm still trying to sort of pick up the sticks and stand in front of the oncoming train of generations of cycles of abuse, of settling, of chaos, and saying, actually, no, this stops with me now. It really stops with me. So even though the burden has been heavy, having the community that I have now means that the burden's getting lighter and lighter all the time, and I feel like I'm coming back to myself. It's not even coming back to myself. It feels like I'm finding myself for the first time and realising who I am outside of abuse, who I am outside of fear, who I am outside of trauma, and being able to, reflect on the fact that I've got skills that saved me at the time and saved the people around me at the time, but actually revel in that and say, actually, no, these are real strengths now.
So what I'm hearing is, by putting yourself first also means that actually putting this heavy baggage down, but you need the right space to do it in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, like I go through these processes now, like really self-aware, because I have to be, because of the space that I take up, because of the healing that I've done already. I have to think, am I in reaction to something, or am I in response to something, right? And often when we are in the midst of abuse, we're in reaction all the time. We're reacting. We're having to sort of dynamically risk assess everything that it is that we're doing. And the safer the spaces I find myself in, the more I can just kind of breathe within it a little bit and take a step outside of myself and look and see, right, well, if I don't need to react right here, right now, how am I feeling? Right, well, I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable in this moment. I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable, but I don't feel reactive in this vulnerability. I feel like I'm able to kind of watch it and respond. Kind of watching myself do this right now, which sounds really weird, and people watching might think, oh, that's really strange. She's having this kind of outside of herself epiphany. But that's how I go through pretty much everything now, is this almost half a second in front of myself to say, right, well, how are you feeling about this particular thing? All right, cool, you're feeling like this. This feeling's valid, whatever this is. It's anger, this is sadness, is it whatever it is. So what behaviours could happen off of the back of this? Well, if I'm feeling vulnerable, I might cry, or I might run out the room, or, you know, enter into fight or flight, whatever that looks like. Or I might go, do you know what? This feeling of vulnerability is really valid. I can be safe within here, within this space, within this incredible platform that you've got, and just be for a second. Even with the lights and the cameras, it's really weird that I can just be for a second and go, actually, everything that I'm feeling in this moment, everything that I've felt before and since and I'll feel afterwards is entirely valid. And coming back to the fact that, am I in reaction or response? And being in response feels really powerful.
You are powerful. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. I mean, that's a fact, right? We know that. And so what I'm really feeling here is, with all this incredible community that you've got as a community leader yourself and as a business owner, breaking all these cycles, that actually having this space is important for everybody, no matter where they are in their life. Yeah,
and this is the thing. This is why Lejla, Please Tell My Story is so important for me personally, but to work out how we elevate this even more, to find these safe spaces to be in response and not reaction. People will look at the fact, I've written books about overcoming self-sabotage. I have a CIC that's becoming a charity that specifically works with people who've experienced domestic abuse to build businesses and so on. And people may look at me and go, well, you've got it together, Dan. You've done the work already. You're healed, right? You're here in your whole state. And actually, I need this space as much as anybody else. I'm still a survivor. I'm still recovering. I'm still on the journey, even though I've done a lot of the work and I'm much further along in the process as, say, someone who's going through crisis right now. I wouldn't say, I'm calling time on my marriage isn't crisis. That's still part of my recovery, and it doesn't mean it's any less sad that that's, you know, the end of my marriage, my safe and secure marriage, the marriage where arguably I may have settled for that safety and security and nothing else. Being able to sort of process that here, and hopefully somebody, you know, might stumble across this and think, oh, do you know what? I don't have a story that where I'm in the throes of it all now. I might only just be realising this is something that I've experienced in the past, be it financial control, coercive control, reproductive control, all of these things, all of which I've experienced. Time, I don't think, is a thing when it comes to processing these things, because sometimes you've gone through it and not realised it till years afterwards, or you've realised you've gone through it and then you'll rip a plaster off again, and you it's like layers of an onion all the time. You will do a little bit of healing and then you'll trip up again, and then there's something else will happen, and it'll bring you back to a certain point in time, or the realisation like I had when I read the Will Smith autobiography. Oh my God, am I an entertainer because I experienced abuse? Are my skills now invalid because they're a trauma response? Am I funny anymore? Like, what do I do? Like, should I even be entertaining? Because if I hadn't have experienced that, what the hell would I be doing? You're like, well, who the fuck is Dani Wallace? Again, you rip back another layer of the onion. You have to look at yourself a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper and find out who you are each time. So having a space like this it's incredible.
Right, because healing isn't linear. We know that, and we repeat this over and over again. But do we actually acknowledge it ourselves as community leaders? Isn't it so? There's just something so safe about knowing I can go from my community into another and I can just be me. I don't have to play a role.
Yeah.
I can just let my guard down, let the mask go,
yeah.
and I can be vulnerable.
Yeah, and I joke all the time with my family and with my community. My full name is Daniela, and nobody outside of my immediate family calls me Daniela. Everybody else, I'm Dani Wallace. And it's not just Dani, it's Dani Wallace, unless you're like my circle of friends. And there is a distinct difference between the hat and it's not fake, it's just an amplified version of myself that I have in my professional facing self, right? There are very few spaces outside of that, because it's so high profile, where I can just be Daniela again and actually reconnect with her, and she's really important. She's really important to me, and Dani Wallace is only an amplified version of that person. I think they're getting closer and closer together the more that I do this work, and I feel like I'm ever changing, ever evolving, but ever connecting to bringing those two together so they don't feel so separate.
Well, without Daniela, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now, and you wouldn't be trying to achieve all these amazing goals that you have, right? We always say that no one really does this work just for fun. We do it because we want to change lives. So what does that look like for Fly Anyway? What does that look like for I Am the Queen Bee?
So there was two pieces of work that I wanted to do in the world. One is that I wanted to help people who ordinarily wouldn't have a platform take up space, because I knew what it was like to be wanting to take up space but not being validated, not being seen and heard, not properly. Yes, I'd make people laugh. Yes, I'd sing, but it was always very frivolous. It was all very, it wasn't important. And I always knew that I had something important to say. When I was working in corporate, I had something important to say. But because I was this showgirl, this entertainer, this sort of rent-a-gob, that often the importance of what I had to say would be lost in the melee. And the more I got to know myself, the more I realised actually my experiences have made me really wise. They've made me really articulate. I'm incredibly intelligent. And in creating IATQB and my speaking work and helping other people from marginalised communities, marginalised genders take up space in business where they might not have ordinarily felt safe to, has become a core part of my life's work. And then for the Flying Away Foundation, the plans for that is, they're not nothing I do small. But yeah,
we do big and we die trying.
Right. If we're going to go out on the hill, this is the hill we're going to go on, right? But yeah, so we've got a plan in the first instance where we help people who've experienced domestic abuse build businesses. Because what I found was I was completely fucking unemployable. Like, I didn't want to be told what to do or monitored, or I'm a clever stick. I didn't want to be sort of managed, and I wanted, if I was going to be a manager, I didn't want to be a manager. I wanted to lead, and people within sort of those employed roles didn't want to be led. They wanted to be managed because that's what they were used to, and it was all kind of all over the place. And so actually creating a business helped me create financial freedom for myself. It built my self-esteem. It gave me that sense of pride, that sense of ownership back. Being the breadwinner, you know, really kind of, it made me feel the power that I never had when I was in that abusive relationship, when I was seen as vulnerable and treated like a parasite would treat a host. You know, the guy that I was with would go around and find these hosts and have babies with these hosts and use up all their finances and their energy and their love, and would use them as an anchor and go around. And actually having my own business allowed me to really take back the reins for myself and say, you know, I'm not in the hands of somebody else. Everything's up to me. Either life is happening now to me or for me, or it's going to happen to me, or I'm going to happen to it. And I decided on the latter. So I want to help as many people happen to life as possible instead of life happening to them. So that's the next bit's employability. So having a business isn't for everybody. So we're going to be working with people to help them from a trauma-informed perspective get into employment in a safer way and help inform more businesses about being trauma-informed. And then we're going to be heading into, hopefully, teaming up with you guys and moving into that sort of crisis support, post-crisis support, and eventually a national network of refuges. That sounds massive when I say it out loud.
You know what? I've got goosebumps because all I'm hearing is like, in spite of it all, we rise.
Right.
And we are powerful, not because of what happened, but because we will thrive in any environment we're in.
Right. And to be here today and hear all these stories that have been, you know, part of this incredible series 3 is just an honour to be sort of part of that statement and that kind of line in the sand to anybody who's experienced domestic abuse, whether in any of its facets, and they're all valid. That we get to happen to life, we get to take back control again, we get to take back the reins.